Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to a very special edition of Atlas Information Live. We are, as always, grateful and glad that you could be with us today. And what makes this particular live stream so special is that it is the culmination of a series, if you will, which began many weeks ago with our live stream on meditation, although we didn't know it at the time. As always, we were just following instructions and without any premeditation, ironically, as to where this was all going. We were just presented with the topics one by one in the moment. This is what you need to talk about. And we, as always, followed our heart. And here we are today. We went from meditation to emptiness to fullness, and the culmination of that process, culmination of that, the relationship between these aspects of being, of reality, is of course oneness. It is the last of the nessnesses that we have to encounter and comprehend and, most importantly, embody. Because we hear a lot about oneness, and many people will speak as if they understand what it means to be one with the universe and to be one with all beings, all creatures, all creation. But they have not undergone the slow and arduous, meticulous and disciplined process which we have taken over the past 4 or 5 weeks. We say 5 weeks because we took a week off for Father's Day. The process of experiencing and knowing that emptiness, of emptying one's cup, emptying the vessel, and being with that emptiness, and then experiencing the fullness of that emptiness, the fullness of being in that space of acceptance, the ability to receive. And what is it that we receive, if not knowledge, if not connection, if not the experience of oneness? But there are, as in all matters of spirituality, mysticism, esotericism, and religion, indeed, all philosophy, all belief, there is a degenerated version, because the Black Lodge is very good and at twisting and corrupting and degenerating. After all, that is their job. That is their divinely ordained purpose. And so oneness is not immune from the influences, the conditioning of the Black Lodge. And in us, the rational mind, the ego mind, the monkey mind, the mind of reason, which comes along and interprets experiences for us and applies intellectual understandings to those experiences as subjective interpretations. And the result is we are misled. We are confused. We become delusional, convinced that some illusory version of oneness, for instance, is authentic. Now, what do we mean by that? What is an illusionary version of oneness? Well, if you've ever gone to a rock concert, you've experienced it. If you've ever gone to any type of political rally or any type of religious congregation where a charismatic evangelical type of a pastor is leading the proceedings. If you have ever been caught up in a mob, in a riot, in any type of collective group where the group seems to take on its own singular behavior, a vibe which we get caught up in. And we lose all sense of ourself as we get carried away by the predominant emotional state of the crowd. And we are a part of that crowd. And we get caught up in the fervor, in the passion, in the intensity, in the whatever the case may be. And again, you've experienced this. At some point in your life, you have experienced that the, quote, oneness of some group dynamic. We don't even have to go to such extremes of, rock concerts and political rallies and riots and rebellions. We can simply go to something as simple as groupthink, where you have been even in a small group, and as you plod along, the individuals, you begin to notice how the individuals begin to lose sense of themselves and who they are in their own independent thought, and they begin to fall into this phenomenon which we call groupthink. And groupthink is not an emotional state. You're not getting caught up in some pastor's sermon, right? There's no band playing music. There's no lights and pyrotechnics and 80,000 people jumping up and down to the beat for you to get caught up in. It's just a small group of people, and you're a member of that group, and everyone starts thinking the same way. They get caught up in groupthink. And whether consciously or unconsciously, you might find yourself nodding your head and going along with it. Just getting caught up in it. Now, most people, if we were to hazard a guess, be they of spiritual bent or religious or what have you, most people, we are willing to bet, would err on the side that a phenomena like groupthink is not oneness. There's something going on there, but it's not oneness. You are not, everybody in that group is not thinking the same way because they are one with one another, and that they are conscious and cognizant of that fact. And yet, in the context of a religious sermon, or in the context of a New Age spiritual festival, like a festival like Burning Man, or an activity like, for example, a sweat lodge, or some other collective group so-called spiritual activity, the participants, if you ask them, will likely tell you that yes, they were experiencing oneness. Certainly the New Agers will tell you that. And that being together at Burning Man, or being together at this festival or that festival, or this even music festival or whatever, and everybody being together, and it's, and everybody's smoking their marijuana or doing their psychedelics or whatever, and all of this is a celebration of the oneness, and all of this is allowing everyone to experience that oneness. But that's a false oneness. There's no difference between any of that and the groupthink that's happening in the boardroom or in the classroom. So so why isn't it? What is authentic oneness, objective oneness, versus the oneness of the religious congregation, or the oneness of the spiritual festival, or the oneness of the mob mentality, the mob which goes on a riot and terrorizes the downtown core and does millions of dollars in damage, where people lose all individuality and sense, and any conscience and any self-control is completely lost as they're caught up in whatever is happening around them in that group, in that collective. Before we continue, we are going to remind ourselves to share the link to today's live stream. It is in the chat, and it is now also on the screen. It is, as always, an opportunity for you to come and become one with today's discussion and experience the oneness of the live stream. But of course, it's at your discretion, and it is not mandatory. It's just something that we open to allow you to come and participate if you so choose. So clearly, how about the experience of being out in nature? When you go out in nature, do you feel like you are one with all the organisms, the plants and the rocks and the trees and the birds and the insects and any other animal you might encounter? And perhaps there's a waterfall or a flowing river or a lake or some other body of water, an ocean perhaps. When you go scuba diving or snorkeling on a reef in a tropical ocean, and you see that unbelievable diversity of colors and textures and life forms, this whole different world, which is in many ways completely alien to us land dwellers. And you are immersed underwater, and you are buoyant in a way that you cannot be on land. Somehow underwater, because of the density of the water, we can achieve this, well, we even call it floating, do we not? And this oneness, because we're mostly water, and so we're surrounded by what we are mostly made of. And despite the fact that we can't breathe for any number of minutes, however long you can hold your breath, or if you have an oxygen tank, for however long oxygen supply you have, you can be one with that environment and feel like, at least temporarily, at least momentarily, you are another organism in this vast alien underwater world. And perhaps to one degree or another, you feel this way when you go into the forest, or when you go into the desert, or when you go into the meadow, or when you are climbing a mountain. Or perhaps even when you're spelunking, which is perhaps an archaic term that refers to cave diving. If you go exploring caves, exploring underground, if you've ever gone into a mine, or if you've ever gone into catacombs, or any ancient structures that were carved out of the living rock hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, and you go into these subterranean corridors and dungeons, and you're exploring in the dark, and these stone walls, covered and with salt stains from the hundreds of years of water trickling down their side. Or if you go into caves proper and you're climbing past the stalagmites and stalactites, perhaps there you feel a oneness, because now you're in the very bowels of the earth. Is that oneness the oneness that we experience in nature? Is that oneness? We're simply asking the question. And how does that oneness differ from what we mentioned earlier, the crowd mentality, the religious congregation, the spiritual festival, the groupthink in the boardroom? What about the oneness that you experience with a loved one? We'll get to that in a minute. Benjamin has a well, there's a whole bunch of comments. Azazel has a bunch of comments, but right now we're going to get to Benjamin's first. He says, I went camping this weekend and felt a deep connection with nature. Seeing the diverse life forms and natural beauty made me realize that the thoughts and concerns I had been preoccupied with were insignificant. And just backtracking here, Azazel said, being touched by the Christ or by encountering demons, we become familiar with a new level of oneness. We'll return to that. Hermistriz says, sometimes, especially if it's a running stream, so being out in nature and feeling that oneness. And Azazel says, yeah, especially with birds for some reason. You feel oneness with birds, or he says, or cats following you for eternity. So sometimes we detach ourselves from it. Okay. So continuing on this, again, many people will call it a thought experiment, but this is not a thought experiment. This is an experiment of experiential knowledge, using our conscious imagination to put us, to retrospect and put us back into those circumstances as we're describing it, and to feel how we felt, how we feel in nature in these circumstances. What do we feel? And is that oneness? Benjamin Ochoa says, even our idea of a collective good or collective bad, micro and macro, is an abstract oneness. It's pretty weird. And he adds a haha. So let's go to that micro level. Because in truth, the smallest version of oneness that we can experience with another being, but a oneness of equals, if you will, a collective of equals, would be our spouse. Because that is the most intimate type of oneness that we can experience. And a man and a woman experiences that oneness on the physical level, as two mortal bodies become one in the act of sexual alchemy. And of course, many, 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 many people obviously do so every day. And many people will tell you that they are one when they do that with their partner, that they are achieving union and oneness with their partner. And as we all know, the consequence of how most people engage in that activity, if they do not take chemical or mechanical precautions, the outcome of such union can be the creation of a little one. So surely the act of sex is oneness. If the outcome can be a little one, another one, a new one, surely the act which creates a new one or another one or a little one, surely that act is an act of oneness. Is it not? So where are we going with this? Where are we headed with this? And what about those moments of being with your intimate partner, your spouse, or another family member? So it's a non-sexual intimacy, filial love, familial love, love between you and a brother, perhaps you and a twin brother or a twin sister, who at some point in their existence, in the womb, at some point, those twins were one. And then they separated, became identical twins. What about that sort of connection? Can you have such a connection with a friend? Again, not an intimate relationship, but just a love, whether it's a family member or a very, very close friend or a best friend, a confidant, a mentor even. And have you experienced moments with them which you felt as though you were one with them? How about situations, circumstances when you thought about someone and then moments later the phone rang and you picked up the phone and it was them, it was the person you were thinking of? Surely we have all experienced something like that, where we happen to be thinking about someone, and in that moment, we get an email from them, or we get a text message from them, or they call us on the phone. And you answer the phone, and you say hello, and they say, you know what? I don't know why, I just had to call you. And you say, well, that's kind of weird. I was just thinking about you. You know how many times telephone conversations begin that way? Oh, what a surprise. I was just thinking about you. Is that oneness? Is that an example? Is that a symptom or a sign, a clue about oneness? Or is it something else? Something which seems like oneness. Again, bringing it back to that boardroom, and everyone so-called getting on the same page. Is that oneness? Groupthink. Following the crowd. Does that mean you are one with the crowd and one with everybody in the crowd? There are many, many experiences that we can have which are varying different degrees of a phenomenon which is absolutely intrinsic and fundamental to the very nature of reality itself. What's more, it is fundamental to the nature and substance of being. What's more, it is fundamental to the nature and substance of the absolute emptiness, from which forth comes the fullness and the totality of all manifest reality. Emptiness and fullness, as we discussed last week, are intimately related, and that what appears to scientists as being empty is in fact full. Emptiness and fullness are one. There is a oneness between emptiness and fullness. And as above, so below, that fundamental, foundational truth that you can't have emptiness without fullness, and you can't have fullness without emptiness. Therefore, there is a intimate oneness, and that the relationship between these two is akin to the relationship between masculine and feminine, the active and passive, the affirming and the negating, the expressive and the receptive. And that it is in the union, the paired union, the oneness, that the act of creation itself is possible. Without it, it's impossible. And it is the coming together, it is the union, the creation of that oneness, which is the power to create itself. But you have to bring those opposites together. So, for example, as we were saying earlier, it's sort of um, what's the word? Facetiously, how sex, we can create a little one, a new one, another one. especially people who have big families and lots of children. They have 10 children already. Well, and the wife is pregnant again. Well, we're making another one. So oneness, right? The coming together of opposites, the masculine and the feminine, to create a new one, to procreate. But is that oneness in its pure form, in its purest expression, in the same way that we were talking about emptiness and fullness? Remember last week when we were talking about fullness, we talked about these false fullnesses. How gluttony is a way where people feel full. And recall that at the same time we talked about emptiness. How there's a joke that what a man is happy when his stomach is full and when his nutsack is empty. And we talked about anorexia and bulimia and how the purging, the physical purging of food, or the wasting away of the body, of being ever more skinny and skinny and skinny and skinny, is a kind of false emptiness. And of course, gluttony is a false fullness. There's a fullness there, but is it the fullness that we're speaking of from a metaphysical, esoteric, spiritual capacity? And we all agreed that, yeah, sure, as above, so below, that's fine, but that there's an inversion of this, there's a perversion that takes place. So there are perverted forms of emptiness, and there are perverted forms of fullness. So it follows there must be perverted forms of oneness. Now, what do we mean by perverted form? There are only two states: consciousness and mechanicity, objective and subjective. So in other words, oneness on the level of mechanical nature. There's oneness on the level of divine nature, on the level of consciousness, on the level of soul, on the level of being, on the level of Christ. And then there's oneness on the level of mechanical nature, on the level of ego, on the level of identification, on the level of thought, of emotion, of energy, vibe, and on physicality, on a physical level. There's oneness that can be achieved. And that intimate oneness between a man and a woman on a physical level can even produce a new one, a little one. Now, from this standpoint, from this perspective, which is objectively true, one cannot argue this. I mean, one can argue it, but one would be wrong to do so. Because it is not outrageous to suggest that someone stuffing themselves until they're at the brink of vomiting that is a false fullness, that is fullness on the level of mechanical nature, and that's fullness under the control of ego. No reasonable person would argue that kind of gluttony, no reasonable person would say that gluttony is somehow an expression of divine fullness, that someone is somehow partaking in the abundant nature of the Divine Mother by stuffing themselves to the point where they have to unbutton their pants. And yet, ask what, 90, 95, 97, 98% of the population, including so-called spiritual people and everyone in the New Age, and they will tell you that having an orgasm and emptying themselves of all their sexual energy is an expression of divine emptiness and is actually a part of divine oneness. And all those schools that teach Black Tantra, they will all tell you that you are achieving divine oneness and you are experiencing sacred sexuality via the orgasm. When clearly, if you look to the example of gluttony, clearly orgasm is just the inverse of gluttony. Just like bulimia, it's just another type of purging and the satisfaction, the perverse satisfaction that comes from that. Or yelling and screaming at somebody and getting all your anger and frustration out on someone. Yeah, it makes you feel good. You purged yourself of all this negative energy. And so momentarily you feel good. Yeah, you get endorphins and dopamine and all kinds of stuff going because you did that purging and you emptied yourself of pent up anger and frustration or what have you, or fear even. And that fear is converted to anger. But is that divine emptiness? And are the 80,000 people jumping up and down to the beat and all getting caught up in the vibe of the music festival or the rock concert or what have you? Is that divine oneness then? Is the group think in the boardroom divine oneness? Unfortunately, oneness is genuine oneness. Follows from genuine emptiness and genuine fullness and genuine divine union of emptiness and fullness, of reception and expression, of masculine and feminine, but divine masculine and divine feminine, conscious union, conscious oneness. One of the keys to discern the difference is through self-observation and self-remembering and the cultivation of discernment itself. You observe the feeling of oneness or the symptom of one or the phenomenon of oneness, and you observe how it came about. What was the process? Did it arise spontaneously? Did it arise consciously? Or did it arise mechanically, automatically, reactively? And are we saying that there's anything wrong with going to a spiritual, New Age festival or a religious congregation and feeling one with everyone? Well, no, there's nothing particularly wrong with that. But if you lose yourself, in the process of getting caught up in that collectivism, in that mechanical oneness, and if you forget yourself as you get caught up and lose yourself to the hive mind, to the groupthink, to the mob mentality, to the congregation, to the charisma of the rock band or the evangelical pastor, you are in that moment moving further away from divine oneness. And moving more into mechanical oneness. Another way to comprehend the difference is when how are you making the connection? And on what level are you making the connection with the other? So if you are making that connection on a purely physical level, so let's go to the example of the diver who's snorkeling on the reef, and you're surrounded by water. You're literally immersed. You're literally one with the ocean because, again, as we said, you are mostly water. And you are immersed in this other alien world, and you're surrounded by it. You've delved deep into it. So you are literally one with the ocean in that moment. And the colors and the fish and all the flora and the fauna and everything else. And if through all of that visceral sensory experience, you feel that oneness and that connection, and it's what you are feeling and experiencing is being immersed into that community of the reef, and you feel like you're a part of it and you're one with it. That's an externalized oneness. That's a oneness which comes from like on the physical plane. And even if that stirs you emotionally and it stirs you intellectually, and you can contemplate and realize that you're one with all things and you're one with all, and you can believe that, that is still like it's an externalized experience of oneness. It's I'm one with everything out there. And to the degree that penetrates your internal dimensions, your supernal dimensions, that's all well and good. It can affect you energetically, it can affect you emotionally, it can affect you mentally. In fact, it can even get to the point of motivating your willpower. It can affect you causally. And this we see when in sports teams, when a coach is giving his pep talk, and if you've ever watched any type of team sports movie, whether it's Hoosiers from the 70s with Gene Hackman, or Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington, or any type of uh, movie that involved team sport. At the climax of the film, or just before the climax of the film, the coach or the general manager or whoever will give this rallying pep talk, this fiery, motivational speech to the team. And that team is pumped up and revved up and inspired to go out and give their all, and they end up winning the championship or winning the final game or doing whatever it is that they needed to do. So their willpower is now wrapped up in this collective will as expressed by the coach, their leader. And that's what charismatic leadership does, by the way. It rallies and it motivates individuals to be able to harness and dig. They even say it, right? Dig deep. Dig deep. What are we digging deep into? We're digging deep into ourselves to harness our willpower, the will of our being to fight, to overcome all obstacles, to overcome the adversary, to win the pennant or win the cup or whatever the case may be, or take the hill, right? In the military context, because the exact same trope, the exact same archetype is played out in military movies, where the squad commander or the colonel or the general stands before the army or the platoon or whatever the case may be and gives his rallying charismatic speech. And then the soldiers go and they take the hill or they do whatever. It's the same archetype. It's the same thing that's going on. So, but you see how this is an outside in kind of phenomenon. Even though that charismatic leader himself is digging deep and he's inspiring these people, he might be using incredible language and motivating them emotionally and motivating them mentally and motivating them even on the level of willpower. And to the degree that they have some kind of transcendent goal to achieve, then indeed that leader may be drawing on divine inspiration. And that's the dividing line. That's the dividing line between what is mechanically motivated oneness and divinely inspired oneness. What's divine oneness and what's mechanical oneness. And then that border is not a hard break. It's a hairline, and there can be some overlap, obviously. So what's a good example of overlap? Singing in a choir. Singing in a choir. And if you're singing, like if you've ever heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the fourth movement, there is a choral section. They sing the Ode to Joy. And there's a choir singing the Ode to Joy. And if you've heard that, if you've been in the audience listening to that, you are experiencing, yes, a divine oneness, but right on the border of physical oneness, of mechanical oneness. And everybody in that choir is right on the border, rubbing against divine oneness and mechanical oneness. Because after all, they're all singing the words on the page, and they're singing the notes on the page, and they're following the conductor who's keeping them all on the same page, on the same tempo, with the same, intensity, etc., and the same volume, etc., 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 and in unison and in harmony with the orchestra. All of this has, let's face it, these are mechanical things. These are mechanical nature. The people in the choir are reading the notes, reading the words, paying attention to the conductor, and they have to listen. But they also have to have their consciousness focused and aware and awake, and they can't be daydreaming while they're doing their job, singing in the choir in a recital of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. But there is a mechanical aspect there it's undeniable. And even though we can be moved to the very core of our being, listening to that, or being in the same auditorium, the same concert hall as that performance, and be completely swept away by the energy of that. And we are caught up in the mechanical oneness of the experience of that concert and that choral music. There is a conscious divine aspect there as well. Any type of sacred music. So you see, it's not so cut and dry and saying this is oneness and that's not, or that's false oneness and this is real oneness. There's an overlap, if you will, or a gray area, or a transitional phase, or however you want to visualize this or comprehend it. But you know it when you've experienced it. And we've all experienced this, where some mechanical experience crosses over and starts to touch the divine. And the mechanical oneness crosses over and starts to take on the characteristics of divine oneness. There's a couple comments here from Azazel, and we'll continue. Azazel says, kind of tiring to be ping-ponged between the divine and the demonic. And by that, we assume you mean the divine and the mechanical. He says, in the moments when you call out to your being in your lucidity and there's no response. We're assuming that this comment you made to suggest that this is a moment where you're desperate for oneness, and you don't get a response. It's like unrequited love. You've made an overture to your higher self, and it appears that you are met with an unreciprocated love, an unreciprocated connection, a longing for connection. You want to connect with them, but they don't want to connect with you. That's what it feels like. So you're left. It seems like you're left hanging in those moments, and we've all felt that way, where we've called out to God, or we've called out to our higher self, or Jesus, or whoever, and asking for help, begging for help, and we got no response. And and Azazel says that that's exactly right. So that cry for help, if that originated from ego, this is the question. Did it originate from ego or not? And why should your higher self answer a call for help that originated in fear or in pride or in pain or bitterness or frustration? Christian, one of the Gnostic instructors at Glorian, he has a favorite expression. Or maybe it's not his favorite expression, but he likes to repeat it a lot. And he says, God and the devil cannot mix. And we can contextualize and comprehend that viewpoint or that fact when we observe a parent ignoring a temper tantrum that a child is throwing. So if you are a parent and you have had a so-called terrible two, or a child of any age for that matter, who's throwing a temper tantrum, if you go to the child, or a baby in the crib for that matter, if you go to the baby and pick up the baby and comfort the baby every time the baby cries, you are conditioning the child. You are creating you are reinforcing a negative behavior. It's sometimes you just have to let a baby cry and let the baby cry itself out. And when a 2-year-old is throwing a temper tantrum, if you respond to every temper tantrum that 2-year-old throws, even it's not even a question of giving in and giving the child what they want. It's just acknowledging the temper tantrum. Because maybe the child might be throwing the temper tantrum just to get attention. So if you respond to that temper tantrum every time, you are strengthening that ego. You're strengthening what's causing that temper tantrum. You're strengthening that desire to be coddled and to be spoiled and to be the center of attention. It's not a healthy thing. And any responsible parent and any truly loving parent knows that love is severity and mercy. And sometimes the most loving thing that we can do for our child is to ignore them, is to let them have their temper tantrum, is to let them cry themselves to sleep. Now, from the perspective of the child, this is a bum deal. this is frustrating. This is angering and maddening, and might even makes things worse. Makes them have even more of a temper tantrum, or makes them cry even more. But they'll get over it. What they're learning what they need to learn how to do, to one degree or another, is develop resilience and self-reliance. And it's a child who's being ignored by their parents. They can't see the good in it. They can only feel their pain. They can only feel their frustration. They can only feel their loneliness or sadness or whatever it is, or that they're not the center of attention, and that's all they know in that moment. But in the long run, it's for the best. So the parent, in ignoring the child, is expressing greater oneness than the parent who's coddling the child, and the parent who gives in to every temper tantrum, and the helicopter parent. Now, this, of course, is counterintuitive to all of those parents who raised all those millennials, and all the millennials who raised all those Gen Z, who are delicate snowflakes, and they were raised by helicopter parents, and now they're completely useless. They have no resilience. They have no capacity. They cannot cope with failure, and they expect everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. And that's because an entire generation was stopped thousands of years of tradition and experiential knowledge and bringing up children, and started listening to these so-called pediatric psychiatrists and early developmental psychologists and so on, who some of them didn't even have children and will never have children, but deem themselves to be experts in child rearing, and decided that the most dangerous thing in the world is to traumatize a child and to give childhood trauma. So we must avoid that at all costs. So that's what you ended up with, bubble wrapped kids. And you have two generations now that are utterly useless. Was that love? Or was that fear that was behind these oh so intelligent and oh so wise early developmental psychologists and their advice to helicopter parents that, oh, you don't want your child to get hurt, you don't want your child to be traumatized? No, you do want your child to get hurt. Your child needs to learn how to deal with pain and suffering, because life is pain and life is suffering. Anybody who tells you different is selling something, as we learned from the Princess Bride. And that is defining oneness as love, defining oneness as care, where true caring, true love is unconditional. And that means it's unconditioned. In order for love to be unconditional, it must be unconditioned. And unconditional love simply means unconditioned by ego. Love that's unconditioned by fear, that's unconditioned by the rational mind, that's unconditioned by the beliefs of the oh so clever early childhood developmental psychologists. And love, which is severity and mercy in balanced union, applied unconditionally with infinite wisdom. Where does the infinite wisdom come from? The very oneness of the balanced union of severity and mercy. And where do we get the word severity and mercy from? Well, as a matter of fact, we get it from the image in the background. That, as you may or may not know, is a torii gate. You will find a gate like this outside every shrine that you encounter in Japan. Every shrine will have at least one gate like this. It might be small, it could be large, but this is called a torii gate. And what you're looking at, of course, are the pillars of Jachin and Boaz. And you're looking at the two T's in Attlas. And those pillars are Jachin and Boaz, severity and mercy, masculine and feminine, emptiness and fullness, reception and expression. And now you know why you've been staring at a torii gate for over an hour on a lecture about oneness. Because oneness, by definition, implies a union. By definition, oneness applies a union. Because something which is alone is one. But it cannot know oneness. In the same way that emptiness cannot know emptiness without the fullness in the emptiness. And fullness cannot know fullness unless it fills out the emptiness. And oneness cannot know one cannot know oneness until one has achieved union with another. At least one other. There must at least be two becoming one. Then that act of union of two becoming one is what creates the third force, the creative force. So, and there was a number of weeks ago when we walked through the process of creation from absolute nothingness, where nothing creates something, and that something is everything, if you recall. But everything and something are separate. Remember the dot and the circle around the dot? And we said, well, we have to fix that, so we put a twist in the everything, or we put a twist in the something, which is everything, and then we end up with the holy eight, which is the infinity sign. And remember, we walked through that process of creation from nothing to everything, and the unfoldment of all the dimensions and everything else. It's all predicated on this dynamic. And even out of that emerged the Tao. And so the Tao, even in its duality, what's being expressed there and shown is the oneness and what is beyond the Tao. So in oneness, there must always be a dynamic of we're tempted to say opposites, but that's not, it somehow doesn't feel right. But there is a duality, there is a dialectic at the bare minimum. But it's the harmonic union of those opposites into a third phenomenon, that tri-unity. So 2 as 1 is actually becomes 3 as 1, because the union of the parts is greater than the sum of the parts, which is another aspect of oneness, of genuine oneness, versus mechanical oneness. In mechanical oneness, by and large, what you have is a sum of the parts. You have collectivism. So mob mentality or groupthink is a kind of collectivism, hive mind. It's mechanical, and it represents the sum of the parts. Now, the sum of those parts might be exponential. It might be logarithmic in nature, because it might be multiplicative. Did we say that right? Multiplicative, as opposed to additive, where you say you add up the sum of the parts. You say, okay, that's addition, but in some cases of even in mechanical nature, when we're talking about metaphysical things like emotions, and of course in the fourth dimension energy, we're still talking about metaphysical phenomenon here. So we can have a multiplicative phenomenon, so we get a exponential scale, and that's mob mentality, where 3 people can't start a riot, but 30 people can riot. And 3 people, maybe you can get swept up to a certain degree, but when 30 or 300 or 3,000 or 30,000 people get involved, it just goes off the charts. So you look at the riots that have been happening in France, for example. Now you're talking about the collective anger and frustration of a nation that's being expressed on the streets. But that's not the experience of oneness, of union with the divine. Because to truly experience oneness with all things, we don't look across the branches and say, I'm a branch and he's a branch too, and we're all branches of this great tree. That, you see, that's collectivism. We're all part of this one great tree, and we're all branches, or we're all leaves of this tree. We're all leaves, and we all belong to certain branches, and all these branches are connected to this one tree. We all go down to the one trunk. That's that mechanical, and that's why when a tree sways in the wind, all the leaves and all the branches go in the same direction, right? To get the whole tree sways and everybody sways together. That's collectivism. That's mechanical oneness. That's externalized oneness. That's identifying yourself as a leaf who's a part of a branch, and that's a branch of this great tree of humanity. And those leaves over there, they're part of the same tree, but still, us leaves over here have nothing really to do with those leaves over there. It's just that we all recognize that we're all part of the same tree. This is the intellectual kind of understanding of oneness. Now, people say all the time, "Oh, well, we're all part of one humanity." Okay, but then they'll turn around and behave in a way that's completely antithetical to that truth, because intellectual knowing is not knowing; it's just belief. It's an illusion. And the leaves looking across from one another and saying, "I'm one with that leaf over there." Why? Well, because we're all part of the same tree. That's a belief. There's no evidence for that. And that leaf has not actually experienced that other leaf. The leaf that identifies as a leaf is already living in an illusion. That leaf doesn't know itself. And if the leaf doesn't know itself, how can it know that other leaf? Hermes Tree says, the mob is always like playing with fire. That's what collectivism is. It's playing with fire because the ego rules the mob. And when you're talking about hive mind or groupthink, or a group of people getting caught up in their emotions, well, the tide can turn very quickly because egos are reactive. And if everybody is part of what some might call their morphic genetic field, and everybody is caught up in that, then all it takes is one spark at one end of the field, and the entire mob explodes. It's very volatile. But volatility is an aspect of mechanicity. As Azazel says, we're completely surprised that humanity hasn't been destroyed yet. That in itself means that divinity is quite good at its job. That's an interesting observation. There are limits to how far the morphogenetic field can reach. And it takes a tremendously powerful initiate to be able to expand that reach. Or it takes a very, well, again, yeah, a very charismatic type leader or idol or figure or avatar, prophet, saint, to be able to expand the scope of influence. And what we mean by that is the morphogenetic field is very much on that level of mechanical nature and on those lower levels. And so they're limited by the laws of mechanical nature. But a charismatic leader essentially uses black magic to overcome the limits of mechanical nature. That's what black magic is, right? The control of mechanical nature and the molding of the violation of natural law for some goal, some selfish goal. Hermes Tree says, the light always shines through the dark, which he calls chaos, and so the light always shines through the dark. Chaos cannot exist without it. So we're not sure exactly what you're trying to say. We know that light cannot exist without the dark, but where chaos comes into that, or what is it? Chaos that cannot exist without the dark or the light, or the dark can't exist without the light, or the chaos can't exist without the. So we're not exactly sure what exactly you're saying. What you threw chaos there in brackets. By the way, there's nothing inherently wrong with chaos. Chaos there's two kinds of chaos. You know this when you work with ecosystems. There's positive chaos and negative chaos. But from a psychological point of view, or a metaphysical, esoteric point of view, chaos is inherently neutral unless you're looking at it from the perspective of the White Lodge or the Black Lodge. So to the Black Lodge, free will is chaos. And to the White Lodge, the machinations of the Black Lodge and the suffering caused by the Black Lodge is the chaos. And yet, objectively, chaos is simply the interactions of many spiral progressions of the Alm of Life. That's all chaos is. And remember, the Alm of Life is either the spiral evolution, the dual spirals of evolution, which are expansion and synthesis, and the dual spirals of devolution, which are explosion and implosion. You take those four spirals, you throw them together, and you get chaos. There's no avoiding it. So Azazel says, yeah, okay, so he was agreeing with us about something. About the we were talking about charismatic leaders who can expand the scope of the morphogenetic field, and that's why humanity hasn't destroyed themselves yet, because someone like Adolf doesn't come around every day, and then not even someone like Elvis Presley, right? An Elvis Presley doesn't come along every day. No matter what people believe about, Madonna or what's her face, any of these Lady Gaga, or any of these people, like none of these people have had the same power over their audience as say Elvis Presley did. So it takes, and then you look at the other side, someone as Buddha Shakyamuni or Jesus of Nazareth, and the impact and the effect that they had was, or even Gandhi for that matter. And that's because they're tapping into something much deeper and much more powerful, which supersedes the more mundane mechanical levels of nature. And it's just a question, are they using light magic or dark magic in order to be able to enact the influence that they're doing? Hermes says, okay, sorry, ignore the chaos. And he said, I just meant in relation to how light and dark coexist, and neither can dominate the other, as balance is the key. Okay. So, balance is the key, but we cannot discount the eternal process of balancing, the constant, conscious process of balancing. So let's step back for a moment, and we look at the Tao, right, the yin and yang, and and we see the Tao, and what we see there appears to be in balance. But in the very design of the yin and yang, it's in motion, it's in movement. And what we must comprehend is that in reality, it behaves in that movement, in that constant flux. It behaves much more like a lava lamp. And if you've ever observed a lava lamp, you know that the volume of wax to oil is constant. The lava lamp is always in perfect balance. But observe a lava lamp. Does it ever look like the Tao? If you turn the lamp off and you wait until all the wax settles down at the bottom, then it's no longer, then it stops being in motion, and it's nothing. Then it's separation. The wax separates from the oil. It's still a lava lamp, but it's not doing its thing. The application of the light, which is heat, heats up the wax, changes its buoyancy, it causes it to expand and flows up into the oil, and the rest is, well, we're assuming everybody has seen a lava lamp, and knows what we're talking about. That's a very crude analogy and crude example, if only because even a lava lamp is in constant flux, and it's mechanical. It's mechanical. It's not conscious. There's light there, causes heat, but all the flux and all the movement of that lava lamp, it's mechanical. And yes, you can say, oh yeah, but it's in balance. You said yourself it's in balance. But it's constantly balancing in its own way. Even though it's the same amount of wax to oil, it's constantly in motion and flux. Something very similar is taking place between consciousness, the divine, and the mechanical. And it's consciousness itself that is being balanced, while consciousness is actually fluxing between the divine and the mechanical. But karma is the word we're looking for. Karma is what is consciously balanced in the universe. So this statement, neither can dominate the other as balance is the key, that's flatly incorrect. That's not true. At any given point in time, when you look at a lava lamp, wax can be dominating any particular square inch of the lava lamp. The lava lamp is ultimately in balance, but at any given point in time, if you take a snapshot, if you dissect 1 cubic inch from that lava lamp, if you were able to freeze the lava lamp and go in and cut out a cubic inch of the lava lamp, you are in no way, shape, or form going to be guaranteed 50-50 wax to oil. Here on this planet is 97% ego, probably more by now, 98% on average. 98%. How does that fall into how does that fall into your statement that neither can dominate the other? Ego, the darkness, completely dominates this humanity, utterly. The fact that we haven't destroyed ourselves and so on, as Azazel pointed out, as Azazel, that's a tongue twister if you say it too quickly. As Azazel pointed out, that's only because of the power and the strength of the light. Because remember, a match can light up an entire room of darkness. So even the 3% consciousness that this humanity has, and the focus and attention that this humanity receives, that this planet receives, because it is so overwrought with darkness, is that the universe tries to bring more balance to that. So through that 3% consciousness that's available to this humanity, we try to bring more light into the world through that little keyhole. So we're like trying to put a huge spotlight, 50,000 lumen spotlight, and shining it through a tiny little keyhole in order to illuminate the room beyond. Well, there's only so much you can do, but that's what we're doing. That's what the White Lodge is doing with this planet. But it's incorrect to say that one cannot dominate the other. Of course it can. Of course it can. And it does. And this is proven out time and time again by the evidence, by the history, especially this humanity's history. And likewise, during the golden age of a humanity, the light dominates the dark. And it's like a seesaw, like a teeter-totter. There's ultimately always balance there in one sense, right? But sometimes it's like this and sometimes it's like that. It's never just across the board. If in aggregate you add up all the cosmoses and all the megalocosmoses and the mesocosmoses and everything else, and you take the whole universe all in one, like we did the lava lamp, you can say, yes, of course, ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, mechanicity to divine, they're in perfect balance. Good and evil, light and dark, they're in perfect balance in the grand scheme of things. But again, locally, practically, in microcosm, this is not true, your statement. It cannot be. Because if it were, there would be no movement, there would be no motion. There would be no struggle. There would be no hero's journey. There'd be no alm of life. And the balance that we're discussing here, the separation of emptiness and fullness, to use those, how we got to oneness, or masculine and feminine, or reception and expression, or affirmation and negation, the separation into duality, into opposites, is required precisely that one, and when that separation occurs, that there must be some kind of a fall that takes place to knock things out of balance. And it is in the quest to rebalance and reunite in balanced union to achieve love, that is the quest. The oneness, to restore and reunite the oneness, and in that process bring back all of the experiential knowledge, all of the wisdom that we gained through the story of the fall and the rise again, through the hero's journey. Ultimately, again, it has to be in balance. And the domination is not by one or the other, this one over that one. The domination comes from the oneness itself. And that the recognition that that oneness is the tri-unity, it is the oneness which reigns supreme over the parts. So to put this another way, Hermes trees, the Black Lodge ultimately works for the White Lodge. So the cult of the White Lodge, that's just another trap. One who truly comprehends the Christ and the Logos is beyond White Lodge and Black Lodge. They know that again, how many times have we used this analogy of the chessboard and playing chess? My opponent is my adversary, but not my enemy, even though his pieces on the board are ruthless. And so must my pieces be ruthless on the board. Because if they aren't, if my opponent's pieces do not behave in a ruthless way, then I will have no challenge and the game will be pointless. Likewise, if I am not ruthless in my response to my opponent's pieces, if my pieces do not respond in a ruthless way, in a ruthless manner, then his pieces will dominate my pieces. And again, the game will be pointless. I will lose the game, and for no good reason, because I was naive and stupid. So all those people out there in the new age, when they hear about the elimination of the ego, and they say, no, the ego is your friend, and no, you have to make friends with your ego. You have to you have to integrate your ego. You have to do this, you have to do that, blah, 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 blah. All these people are playing an opponent whose pieces are moving ruthlessly on the board, and they're too sheepish to play the game, to play chess. They're too sheepish to take the pieces that are attacking them. And they're trying to play however they're trying to play. And then what happens? They get completely overrun and dominated by the black pieces, and they lose. So Hermes says, my statement was too. We saw your comment here. You made it twice, and we were just about to get to it. No, it's no, it's fine. I mean, your statement was correct at a certain level, but practically in our lives, right? We have to we face the reality that it's more nuanced than that. Ultimately, yes, correct. Ultimately, but again, this whole thing about domination. You see, Benjamin pipes in and says the Black Lodge might be sort of overwatching both lodges. No, what overwatches both lodges is the absolute, the balanced union of Black Lodge and White Lodge. The oneness, which is the Christ, the perfect multiple unity. And that unity, when you go beyond the Tao into the absolute includes the Black Lodge. It has to. Now, here's where we can recognize and comprehend how it is that, well, hang on a second. Let's back up. We want to get to a couple comments before we get too far ahead, because we're going to go on a new direction now. So let's back up and get a few comments here. So earlier, Hermes Tree said the only one in recent times close to Elvis is David Bowie. Sure, David Bowie. We might argue Elton John was up there in his own way. We would say David Bowie, I don't think ever, although we know where you're coming from, just in terms of sheer popularity. Now, are there any, is there any equivalent to Graceland? Are there any David Bowie impersonators? Is it a thing like Elvis Presley impersonation was and still is? Elvis Presley created a cult. There's a cult to Elvis Presley. I mean, he was an idol, really the first idol in that sense, rock and roll idol. And as Azil says, nowadays K-pop comes rather too close for comfort. Luckily, no, there's no equivalent to an Elvis Presley and Cape. We know where you're coming from. Look, there's obviously lots and lots and lots of idolatry and lots of pop idolization out there. But remember that Elvis Presley was singing gospel music. Elvis Presley was a gospel singer. One of the reasons why the whites hated him in the South when he first started out is because he was speaking, quote, the black music, the blacks' music. It's why the music promoters and everybody ended up loving him, because he was playing all that soulful music, but he was white. He sang like a black man, but he was white. In which way he was marketable to everyone. Anyway, we don't want to get too caught up in it, but then the other thing was his utilization of the sexual force and how he used sexuality and harnessed that, and it became Elvis Presley, without perhaps consciously knowing it, became like a black magician, like all those evangelicals. He completely hypnotized audiences, and the Beatles did this as well, right? And all you got to do is, when you saw the young women completely losing their minds, having emotional psychological orgasms when they're this is the teen idol, the teen heartthrob, et cetera, phenomenon. And yes, as Azil makes a good point, he was also a hell of a musician. Yes, he also had the talent, he had the soul, he had the voice, he had the moves, he had all of these things, this perfect lightning in a bottle. But what it had more than anything else was it had soul. It had the spark of the divine in there. And the same thing can be said for okay, so so Hermes Triz clarifies, that's where I was going with Bowie, the black magician part. Okay. All right, okay, so from that standpoint, but we could say the same thing about Elton John, to be honest with you. I mean, but in his case, he was more of a useful. Elton John was more of a useful idiot than a bona fide black magician. Whereas we tend to agree with you here, Hermes Trees, that Bowie was more conscious about what he was doing than someone like Elton John was. And the thing about and then Hermes Trees says the Beatles had a black magician, Crowley, advising them. Well, that doesn't surprise me. And the other thing too is the then later on the Beatles went to India, and they hooked up with the Maharaja, or these Indian gurus, and then Elton John had his whole thing with Yoko Ono, and it just goes, Mugaboo says Crowley influenced a lot of artists and musicians. So remember when we were saying how there's this blurriness, or this line that separates mechanical oneness from divine oneness, and that there's this gray area, or there's this overlap? Yeah, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That's a twisting of the law of free will, or it's a strange it's a strange twisting of the law of free will. Do what thou wilt. Do what you will. It's like the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. That's what that statement is like. Do what you want, basically. Saying, well, yeah, the law of free will is absolute. No one will stop you from doing what you will. But that's not the same as go and do what you want, and that's the only law. No, it's not the only law. Right? It's so this thing about Crowley influencing artists and musicians. Well, look at U2, for example. U2, like Elvis Presley, U2, in the way that Elvis Presley was a gospel singer, U2 was a Christian rock band. It's one of the reasons why U2 became so popular in the 80s and the 90s, because all of their songs were essentially Christian rock songs. They're good Catholic boys. But as time went on, and they changed their style, and they changed what they were singing about, and they lost that fire and that passion and everything else, they became what they are today. And they also became, multimillionaires and real estate people, and and who knows what else. But the point is that divinely inspired passion and energy can and must mingle with the mechanical. At the end of the day, for music to exist on this dimension, it's created mechanically. For example, analog music or even digital music, it's you must manipulate strings, and they must vibrate a certain way, or you must beat drums or play horns, or you must create the mechanical laws must enact and reproduce on the physical plane that which reflects the divine. And again, we go back to the film Elizabeth, starring Cate Blanchett, when Walsingham says to her, he says, men must be able to touch the divine here on earth. And so when we encounter something like the Sistine Chapel, or we encounter Michelangelo's David, or a performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, or an animal that is clearly behaving in a way which is outside the box of typical mechanical nature of survival of the fittest. So, for example, when you see a dog jumping into a burning building to save a child, or a dog jumps into freezing cold water and to pull someone to safety out of the water, you see mechanical nature which is being driven and shaped and molded by divine nature. And when we see that, we're able to touch God here on earth. And Hermes Trees is bringing up a good point here. He says, you were going somewhere with the evangelical priests. I think the quote that the way to hell is paved with good intentions applies to them. There's a reverse, and that is when the divine and the divinely inspired falls into the hands of ego and is used to manipulate mechanical nature for selfish reasons. And they end up creating more mechanicity, even as people believe that they're achieving oneness. So a good example of this, Hermes Trees, is Joel Osteen and his megachurch in the United States, which seats 80,000 people. And it's not by accident that he has something like a 26 million square foot mansion that includes a helicopter pad. And I don't know how many other Rolls Royces and all the other wealth that he's accumulated. Why? Because he's essentially created a Roman Colosseum for his evangelical sermons. And he is able to brainwash 80,000 people at a time, plus who knows how many more millions on the television or watching online, because he's using that charismatic approach, that Southern Baptist evangelical, what you're talking about here. And I'm not entirely sure he has good intentions. I don't know that. In fact, I am fairly certain he doesn't. I'm fairly certain he doesn't. Or if he does, he has one hell of a twisted way of rationalizing what he's done and what he's going and how he's going about doing it. That maybe God wants him to be that multimillionaire because he's doing God's work, or who knows what. So clearly, If you are a craftsperson, a writer, an artist, a carpenter, a plumber, a baker, a chef, or a landscape architect, or just a landscaper, and you're just responsible for trimming the hedges or mowing the lawn, or, you know, if you find within yourself inspiration to do that work and make that work a prayer, make that work a work of art, something which expresses beauty and truth, and it's just, you're an artist, whatever that you're doing at any particular moment in time, and you're bringing that passion that we talked about weeks ago into the world through what it is that you're doing. You are imbuing mechanical nature with the divine, or you're allowing the divine to express through mechanical nature. Because let's face it, our personality, our mind, our heart, our physical body, our energy, mechanical, unless we are conscious of them and present and full and empty. What does that mean? Unless we are one with our being. When we are one with our being, then the mechanical nature that we are, our mechanical nature, can be transformed, can be transmuted into a tool of divinity, and can become an expression of divinity. And divine nature can express through mechanical nature. And when we see divine nature expressing through mechanical nature, we marvel at it, we wonder at it, we cherish it, and we recognize it for what it is, divinely inspired beauty. We are able to touch the divine here on earth. And for those of us who can open our eyes and see, yeah, we look at Joel Osteen and can see that there's a lot of plastic surgery. But no, this the previous comment here about good intentions, and we look at a Joel Osteen and say, look, yeah, okay, I don't know what that is, but that's divine power being twisted and corrupted for selfish gain. And all those people are being duped into believing that they're achieving one with Jesus Christ, when all they're experiencing there is mechanical oneness. All they're experiencing is collectivism and mob mentality in the hands of a very charismatic black magician. So genuine oneness, meditation, followed by emptiness, followed by fullness, culminating in oneness. So we've shared with you an experience that we had when we were in Japan, when we were playing a video game. We were playing Soul Calibur, and it was late. We were getting, into a sleepy state, and getting sleepier and sleepier, and at some point the game switched over for us into becoming a meditation, and we were completely just playing the game on a different level. And then the game ceased to be able to, forget about beating us in a match, the game ceased to be able to land a hit on us, because anything that the computer wanted to do, anything that because it was a Sony PlayStation game, anything that the the game wanted to any move the game wanted to make, we knew before it made it. We could anticipate anything that it was going to do. We just knew. And we could block, dodge, do whatever. Couldn't even land a hit on us. We just kept getting round after round after round. Perfect, 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 perfect. And it wasn't like I was reading the mind of a Sony PlayStation. The Sony PlayStation has no mind to read. But who does have a mind? The mind of the individual who programmed the AI on the game. And it was when we realized that we had achieved oneness through the artifact, through the game that he had made and that he had programmed. His fingerprints, his consciousness, the fingerprints of his consciousness were all over this game. And it was expressing itself on how this mechanical game was behaving. This divinely inspired game, that divinity was expressing itself through the mechanicity. So through the mechanicity, we could touch that divinity, the divine inspiration. And by putting ourselves into a meditative state and allowing our interaction to become conscious and not zone out like a zombie and thinking about other things, but truly turning the whole situation into a meditation, we connected to not the man, but the soul, the consciousness behind the man. And we achieved oneness with that consciousness. And when we achieved oneness with that consciousness through our higher self, right? Through Attlas and beyond. Because after all, we never got to finish our analogy with the tree leaves and the branches. But we were no longer identifying ourselves as a leaf connected to a branch, but we actually went down into the roots, to the very heart of the tree. And there we recognized that every root tip is part of the same root system, is part of the same tree. And we connected through the tree down into the roots, through our root, through the root system to the other root. And making that connection, being one with our own root, our own source, the source of our source, we could connect to the source of the AI in this game. And then we were unbeatable because we were one with the consciousness that programmed it. And then it occurred to us, wait a minute. If I'm one with one consciousness, why can't I be one with all consciousness? And that's when we put the controller down and we just expanded our oneness from being one with one other consciousness to being one with all beings in the universe. And that's when the floodgates opened and we had a 72-hour experience of essentially the collective consciousness of the world, at least, if not beyond. So it's beyond description, what we had. And then we also told you that we went on the Zen walk for 72 hours and we came home. We were then on the walk, we were tested. And when we came home, we discovered what the test was and that we had failed it, and et cetera, et cetera. We write about it in the book. So there's no point in rehashing it all again now. But this is the key. The key to oneness is being one with ourselves, to being one with our being and the being of beings. Because it's the being of beings who has the potential to be one with all beings. Like all the tips of the roots are part of the same root system, which is born of the tree. So if you want to connect with another root tip, you need to first connect with the root system that other root tip is connected to. This is how you achieve oneness. In the same way that the leaf, believing himself, connected to the other leaf over there on the other branch, it's all just, and then how all the leaves blow and sway in the wind in unison, that's all mechanical oneness. But at the same time, you can't just go down at the root and say, well, I'm connected with all souls. My soul is connected with all souls. Really? Are you? Are you really? Because believing that you are is not oneness. That's just another mechanical, fake oneness. But if you can achieve oneness with your being, and in turn, together, you can achieve oneness with the being of beings, the cosmic Christ, now you can experience oneness with all beings. This is oneness. This is divine oneness. Every other form that we've been discussing up until now has been some kind of, in part or in full, mechanical oneness. A lesser experience of oneness, a oneness of as above, so below, or some hybrid form where, again, divinity comes into mechanical nature in some way, in a positive way or in a negative way, in a beneficial way or in an exploitative way. So to put it in other terms, white magic or black magic, white tantra or black tantra. Because we can achieve divine oneness through white tantra. We can experience that. We can, again, in the same way that I connected to the consciousness, the soul of the individual who programmed the video game I was playing, I connected to them by playing the video game, by engaging with the mechanical phenomenon that he created, that he expressed that consciousness through. So the divine soul inside of your partner and the divine being inside of you, you express your love for each other through the mechanical act, and you transform and you transmute the mechanical act and indeed the mechanical energy. You transform and transmute it into divine energy. And you literally make love. Literally, as you transform that energy from its mechanical lesser form of lust, and you transmute it and transform it into love, and you literally are creating love out of that energy. You are empowering, and instead of creating a little one Another one by spilling the sexual force, by taking that sexual energy and using it to facilitate the creation of a physical one. You're taking that energy, that sexual energy, and you're transmuting it and harnessing it to create a metaphysical one. Solar bodies, the human soul, yours and your partner's, if you are both practicing white tantra. This aspect of oneness we touched on, and why we, and it's no insult or slight against Hermes Tris and his comment about balance, and about how one cannot dominate the other, that light cannot dominate dark, as that they both are in balance. We spent so much time on that topic because this very aspect is at the heart of oneness. That balancing and being able to restore that which is fallen, being able to transmute and transform mechanical into the divine for the sake of oneness. This is essential to being able to experience oneness. Because all of us, right now, to one degree or another, are identified with our mechanical self, with our personality, with our egos, and so on and so forth. We're identified with our mortal self. So what is the process of achieving oneness with our being, such that we no longer identify so much with our mortal self, we identify more with our higher self? There's a transformation, a transmutation that takes place. You may have heard the term transubstantiation. That's a fancy word which combines the prefix, which combines transmutation and transformation with substance. So the transubstantiation is what took place when Jesus blessed the bread at the Last Supper and the wine. And he said, "This is my body, which will be given up for you." And he said, "This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant. It will be shed for you and for all." So when we go to a church or Gnostic temple, and we take unction, right? We take the host. We eat this wafer, this bread. We're eating the body of Christ because it has undergone a transubstantiation. Yes, it's still physical bread. There's still that physical, mechanical aspect to it, without question. But the transubstantiation, which it has undergone, the blessings that is undertaken, it is now a symbol and an allegory, and it actually is energized with the Christic atoms within that substance. That's the transubstantiation. So the other word about substance and substantiation, there's the other aspect of substance and then substantive. Substantive is more than. So this is how these words come together, and words are spelling, right? It's magic, language. And this is magic. And that's what magic is all about. Working with mechanical nature using divine nature. And that's why when you watch a movie that's magical, it's transformative. Films like, for example, we mentioned this week, Sound of Freedom. We haven't seen the film yet because it's not playing in our city. It's on a limited number of screens still. But from everything that we have been able to discern about this film, including from interviews with the filmmaker and the actual man that the film is based on, the life of the man that the film is based on and the work that he does, this is a completely divinely inspired work. And we shared with you an interview on Facebook about it, and we said that we would be mentioning it today. And the reason why it's so apropos and that it was released this week, just serendipitously, that we were going to be talking about oneness, because if you watch any of the interviews or watch Jordan Peterson's interview, for example, it should be on our Facebook. You will witness individuals. What's his name? Tim. Gosh, we're just so bad with names. Okay. Okay. Jim Caviezel and Tim Ballard. And just, this is the video here. And forget about worrying about Facebook and this and that and the other thing. We will share you the link right here. The link is in the chat. And it's on screen. Okay. So this is the interview. And this is, so the movie, this is the title of the video if you want to do a search for it. Okay, but the short link is also in the chat. Right? This is the short link, and then this is the actual title of the video. Yeah, and Hermes Tree says he was in a very underrated adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo. Yes, we know. The film, and you know that he's working with Mel Gibson on the Resurrection of the Christ. And Mugaboo says, yes, he was. Very good movie. And yeah, a very good actor, a good portrayal of Christ. I mean, The Passion of the Christ is like the definitive movie about the crucifixion of Jesus. I mean, you know. Hermes doesn't agree with that. No, I was not interesting. And as Azul says, I ought to watch the Monte Cristo again. In fact, we plan on watching the Monte Cristo film tonight. So Jim Caviezel was, in his own words, he was called to acting. God called him to acting. And Tim Ballard, who is this fellow, he was called to go to Colombia to save a little girl from child traffickers. And the story is remarkable. And the film is remarkable. And the story around the film and about the film and how it's performing is remarkable. And we encourage you to take the time to watch this interview. You will not be disappointed. And you will not be disappointed because you will witness oh yes, Hermes. He says, I was not aware of him in The Passion. Yeah, he played Christ. Jim Caviezel was Christ in The Passion of the Christ. But watch this interview in the context of what we've been talking about today with oneness, because you will witness two people, real flesh and blood people like you, neither of which are Gnostics, neither of which have any concept of innermost being or meditation or higher dimensions or this body or that body or the creation of the human soul or anything like that. And yet, both of them achieved a level of oneness to be able to fulfill their destiny and change the world. You might say in some small way, but in the case of this latest film, perhaps in a very significant way, because we are living in Neo-Babylonia and child sacrifice is once again becoming mainstream. And these individuals are warriors of the light, and they've been called by God to do what they've done. Now, of course, they've been following the will of their innermost being, their innermost essence of God. But again, that's splitting hairs from the big picture perspective, that the Christ is working through them. And one way or another, when they heard the still soft voice, they interpreted a certain way. God is calling me to do this. In the same way that Joan of Arc, when she was a little girl, said, God speaks to me. Of course, it was her innermost being speaking to her. But anyone raised Christian or anyone raised Catholic can only interpret the still soft voice of their innermost being one way, and that's God speaking to me. I'm being called to God. Or God is calling me to do this, or God is calling me to do that. And that's why it's all in the Bible that way. When God tells Abraham to do A, B, C, D, E, and Abraham obeys God, right? God works in mysterious ways. God works through our innermost essence. But here you see two men who are living their life at tremendous expense, tremendous sacrifice for themselves and their family, for the sake of others, and for the sake of the most helpless and the most innocent, and the ones least capable of defending themselves. And it is, this is a story of hope. This is a story of tremendous courage, of tremendous sacrifice, and it is a story of oneness. And when you hear Tim Ballard describe the relationship he has with his wife and what his wife had to say to him when he asked her, should I quit my job, and mortgage the house and everything to go down and try to save complete strangers in South America? And when you hear how his wife responded to that, and you comprehend the oneness that he and his wife must have. Oneness is not some weird abstract thing. Oneness is practical. Oneness is experiential. And oneness, you can see it, you can feel it, you can hear it. The proof is in the pudding. When you can touch God here on earth, you are experiencing oneness when you can touch God here on earth. Whether it's in a song, in a poem, in a book, in an act of kindness, in an animal jumping into a freezing river to save someone, you are experiencing oneness. And if you are awake and aware and conscious, you dive deep into that feeling. Take it with you. It's a precious moment. That serendipity, that momentarily manna from heaven. You witness the transubstantiation of mechanical nature into something divine. You take that experience, take it with you. It's precious. Hold it close to your heart. And then later in meditation, meditate on it. Dive deep into that. Comprehend how the transubstantiation of that mechanicity created this incredible inspirational expression of divinity. And all of this relates back to the emptiness and the fullness, and the fullness and the emptiness, and the emptiness and the fullness, and the oneness of it all. And we know that oneness through ourself. We come to know that oneness through oneness with ourself. And we strengthen that oneness, and we create the solar bodies and build that oneness and our capacity to remain one for longer periods of time, where we spend more time one with ourself than we do with our false self. And one of the key ways in which we do this is by achieving oneness with our spouse in white tantra, by knowing our mortal beloved intimately at the exclusion of all others, and without taking for granted or wasting a drop of the precious sexual creative force. Together we know intimately our mortal beloved, and we achieve together the transubstantiation of our physical bodies via the glorification of the Kundalini, the rising, the union of the divine feminine with the divine masculine, where the fires of the divine feminine unite with the fire of the divine masculine, and it gives rise to the fire of fires and the light of lights and the being of beings of the cosmic Christ, which is the path to the oneness with all beings, because it is the perfect multiple unity. This is authentic oneness and the path to oneness. So we want to connect and feel one with the essence of nature, with the divine mother in nature, to the Christ in nature, through the Christ in ourselves, our innermost essence, that seed within, which has the potential to become a full-blown resurrected master. But we must begin somewhere. And that somewhere is oneness with our higher self. And oneness is being, and more than just being, but bringing into the world through and into mechanical nature the will of that being, the will of our being. Do what thou wilt? Yeah, fine, sure. Do what you want. Yeah, no problem. Do what you want. But better yet, do what your being wills Do the will of your being. Do what thou wilt. Thou with a capital T. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Not do what you want. Do what your innermost being wants of you. To be or not to be, that is the question. So to be one with your innermost being and to do his will, well, that will be the whole of the law of oneness. And the whole of the law of the upward spiral of evolution on the Alm of life. Do what thou wilt, capital T. Do what thou, Father in heaven, wilt. Okay, we're going to backtrack because we have a whole bunch of comments here. Hermes Tree says, I will. It has come up, just not watched. I am glad this topic is being highly profiled like this. Yes, absolutely. Because it's getting no play in the mainstream media. Not like none. Or any mainstream media that are commenting on this film are attacking it. And they're attacking the filmmakers and they're attacking Angel Studios because they're saying that all this child trafficking stuff is just QAnon conspiracy theory and stuff like that. And Hermes Trees also says, I thought I recognized Tim Ballard. Operation Underground has been very heavily demonized as vigilantes by the media. The exposure is one. Yeah, okay, so there you go. Isazel says, it's like the pearl to sell all your belongings for. And he says, and as fishy as it may sound, cast away the small fishes for the bigger fish. So Azazel is taking my my snorkeling and scuba diving analogies seriously, it seems. Andrew Aronson says today that was to tune into the live stream today. Okay, so something about this was the reason why he wanted to tune into the live stream today. Thank you, Andrew. I don't think you've commented before, so thanks for that comment. But yeah, but this is precisely why we brought it up and precisely why we put it on our Facebook to say, look, watch this interview because it's going to relate directly to what we're talking about, oneness. And maybe neither of these gentlemen, if they were listening to this live stream, or if we asked them about it, do you feel one with your innermost being? Maybe neither of them would be able to relate to that. But if you said, do you feel one with God? They would probably say, well, you know what? Maybe not all the time, but when I'm doing his work, when I'm doing what he called me to do, then yeah, I do feel one with God. I do feel Christ. I do feel Jesus. And you know what? Some people, if that's their level and that's the level at which they understand things, then God bless them, right? Who are we to judge? And we don't have to sit there and impose our modus operandi on their thought processes. They're doing God's work. They're doing the will of their innermost being. They're doing Christ's work, and they feel the oneness. They certainly feel the oneness with all of those trafficked children that they're willing to sacrifice and suffer to save them, or to raise awareness that we are living in Neo-Babylon, and child sacrifice. They're trying to make child sacrifice moral again because they want to add a P to the alphabet club. They want to add a P to the alphabet club. They want to legitimately normalize the exploitation of children. And they already have an entire underground industry for that. So how long would it be after normalizing the P? How long will it be before they have bona fide, so-called legalized underage sex workers? Normalized, legalized. Mugaboo says, as fishy as it may sound. He found that an interesting comment, Azazel. Hermes says, my opinion of Peterson has gone up about by giving this exposure. Jordan is an interesting character, and we're living in the Kali Yuga, and the Christ is returning. And the Christ is returning through the Christic force and the intensification of all that's happening on the planet. It's the intensification which in part is bringing about the Kali Yuga itself, and the revelation and all these awakenings and everything else we're talking about. We're going to be talking more about it in our book. Who prepared Israel for the arrival of Jesus, for the first arrival of Christ, if not John the Baptist? Now, John the Baptist baptized in the River Jordan. And Jordan's last name, Peterson, who is Peter. Peter is the rock upon which I will build my church. Petar, P-T-R, the philosophical stone. And Peter's son is the Son of God, and Son is the Son, the Christ, the Christic force. And with his 12 rules for life and all of his sometimes half-baked interpretations of the Bible, he is preparing this humanity for the return of Christ. He's getting them to this level, right? And with all of his, his affiliations now with the conservatives and so on, and the Christians and the Daily Wire and so on, he is helping to prepare for the return of the Christ. And it's only natural that he would take a profound interest in this subject matter and in promoting and getting exposure to what he also has direct personal experience with as a psychologist. He has in the course of this interview, he talks about meeting these monsters in prison and speaking with them and so this is right. And he is, after all, he has a very conscious cognizance of evil in the world. I mean, he is so conscious of the forces of evil, communism, the gulags, and on and on and on. What most people are completely oblivious to and have no idea from. It's like Jordan Peterson has made it his mission in life to do exactly what all those New Agers say you shouldn't. I say, oh, it's all about positive thinking. Oh, it's all about affirmations and visualizing the beautiful golden age that's coming and the mass golden awakening. And it's all spiritual bypassing. And Jordan, who is obviously, he's a Jungian psychologist. He's a student of Jung. He comes along and says, no. You have to go into hell. You have to see the darkness. You have to see the shadow. You have to contend with it. You have to face it. You have to face your own demons. And you have to recognize your own proclivity to become a monster. Now, to the degree that he takes that a little too far, and so on and so forth, and he says you have to be dangerous. You have to be dangerous. And that's a very nuanced part of that psychology, and we don't, hopefully one day we'll have an opportunity to get into it with Jordan Peterson himself. But for the time being, he's not here to have that conversation, so we'll have to wait for another time. But rest assured that Jordan Peterson experiences oneness at his level. When people come up to him and tell him how his books and his talks have changed their life, and he gets all welled up in tears and he starts crying tears of joy, and he breaks down on stage when he tries to tell this story on stage, how people come up to me and they tell me I've changed their life, and he starts crying. It's because he's experiencing the oneness with the Christ, and he's just overwhelmed by it. But make no mistake, he is preparing people for the return of Christ. He's getting people to a place, to a level where they can be ready, where they can be prepared to then receive the next level of teachings, and to take their journey to then the next level. And that's what baptism is. And it's a baptism of fire with Jordan. It's a baptism in the Son, Jordan Peter's son, the rock upon which I will build my church. And people are being baptized in the river Jordan Peterson. Mugaboo says, Jordan Peterson has stood strong against very powerful institutions, but no man is perfect, and we tend to easily idolize heroes. Yeah, he's not perfect. We never said he was perfect. I'm not perfect either, Lord knows. Okay? But God works with the clay that's on the wheel. Remember, none of us are perfect, but we all have the capacity to do God's will, to do the will of our innermost being, and to bring some expression of that perfection, of Christ's perfection, of perfect love into the world through our imperfections and through the imperfect mechanical phenomena that we work with and that we have at our disposal. Benjamin says, very nice of those explanations of John the Baptist and Peter. I didn't know that. Very cool. Hermie says, I thanked him in person for his help, and he was, as you described, genuinely very happy about it. And he says, going to one of his events is like that. A good way to put it, a baptism of fire. Yeah, exactly. We've never been to one of his events. What we know about Jordan Peterson, we know because we are one with Jordan Peterson. Everything we know about Jordan Peterson, we know because it's true. We are one with the same source that drives him, the fire of fires, the light of lights, and the being of beings that gave him his mission that he's living. So on this interview then, that we shared with you, okay, you get to see three individuals: Jordan Peterson, Tim Ballard, and where's Jim? Where's Jim? He's there's and Jim Caviezel. Three men who have achieved some level of oneness with themselves and who have dedicated their life to others, not on some abstract or external or philosophical or moral way, but from a deep, deep connection with themselves, a oneness with themselves, that they feel that oneness and that connection with all beings, and that they suffer and sacrifice, they dedicate their life to serving the world and serving the logos. And you will also, in this interview, and the reason why Jordan Peterson is drawn to this topic, again, as we said, because Jordan Peterson does not shy away from playing the role of Lucifer, the light bringer who shines the spotlight on the evil in this world. Jordan Peterson is not afraid to tell people and shine a light on the evil, the proclivity for evil within themselves. Yeah, that's baptism by fire, all right. The fire of fires and the light of lights. And that's what this movie does. It shines a spotlight on this terrible evil that's taking place in the world. And it challenges all of us to go within and find that connection, that oneness with that, the ultimate source of love that's within us, and it's within these gentlemen, that's within all of us. To empty ourselves, to bring us to empty our cup, to empty ourselves of all of these worldly concerns and all of these other problems that we have and things that we take ourselves so seriously and so self-important, we're so worried about, to empty our cup and to fill that cup with the consciousness that we have available to us in order to receive, in order to experience, in order to be one. And through that oneness, feel and know the suffering of others, and to receive and know what we can do, what we must bring into the world, what we are called to do on our adventure, on our heroic journey, to be all we can be. To achieve the transubstantiation of our life, to achieve the transubstantiation of ourself into ourself and beyond. The metamorphosis, the transubstantiation, when bread ceases to be bread and becomes the bread of life, the body of Christ. Can we honestly look in the mirror and say to ourselves that we have become the body of Christ? No, we have not achieved that transubstantiation, not yet. Not without psychological death, not without comprehending and eliminating our egos. And we cannot achieve the perfect oneness, the perfect union with our immortal beloved if we have not yet achieved a perfect union with our mortal beloved. The stepping stone, the transubstantiation of physical flesh and raw sexual energy, and the transmutation of lust into love, of pride into humility, of fear into courage, of anger into temperance. To be in that place of balancing. to restore and achieve the oneness. And then we too can receive the direction, the mission, and we will have the courage, the humility, the patience, and we will have the strength and confidence to fulfill that great work, to fulfill that great mission. Why? Because that strength comes from the being. That strength comes from our innermost intimate Christ. That is the fire of passion. That is the passion of the Christ. It doesn't come from this mortal self. It comes from that force, that fire, which we want to fill this mortal vessel with in the fullness of its capacity, to be filled with that passion, to be full of that passion, of that force, of that strength, and that wisdom and that knowledge, and most above all, that love, the severity and the mercy in perfect balanced union, expressed unconditionally with infinite wisdom through all of the conditional, subjective, mechanical means at our disposal. Be it in film, be it in words, be it on the internet, be it in person, be it in our cooking, in our woodworking, in our plumbing, whatever the job we have, whatever it is we do, we can be living, breathing expressions of that love, of that light, of that fire, of that passion through everything we do and everything that we touch. How? Through oneness. Just by being one with who we truly are and filling ourselves with our self. And no longer doing what we want, but doing what thou wilt. Thou, capital T. This gate behind us. 2 capital T's. Which reminds us that we should be on the lookout for a spouse. A spouse who is going to support us. And whatever thou wilt, our spouse will come to us with what their thou wilt. And those 2 T's will come together and they will form this Torii gate. The gate from our world into the supernal worlds. And the gate through which all that is in potentiality within us in the supernal worlds can pour with and through and flood into the world through that same gate. Capital T's. Thou, your true self, truth with a capital T. Your true self. That is the thou in the do what thou wilt, shall be all of the law. If that is the only law you follow to do the will of your innermost being, then this Torii gate behind me will be your gate into nirvana and beyond. And if it is your innermost being to die and descend into hell and return 3 days later a resurrected master, then this Torii gate is your gate into the absolute. All you have to do is work towards achieving the oneness, and that we've been describing in this series. The prologue was our talk on meditation, but emptiness, fullness, oneness. Emptiness, fullness, oneness. Masculine, feminine, union. Jacqueline, Boaz, and the space between the pillars. pillar of light, the third pillar, the secret, hidden, esoteric pillar on the tree of life. This is our St. Stephen's cross, right? Oh, we have a heart on it, so you turn it sideways. This is the cross of oneness. This cross. This is the cross of oneness. St. Stephen chose this cross to look this way to reunite the Catholic faith and reverse the Great Schism. He wanted one cross to represent Eastern Catholicism, Greek Orthodoxy, and one to represent Roman Catholicism, Western Catholicism. But if you turn this cross sideways, you get the pillars of Jacquin and Boaz. And in between the pillars of Jacquin and Boaz, you have the third pillar, the pillar of light. That's the Christic pillar. That's the Christ. It's a union of masculine and feminine. That's the divine androgen. And that is the space under the gate. The space under the ark. And it is the ark. Because in a Tory gate, you get a square. And it is that in the ark of the covenant and the ark of Noah. And we, Attlas, we are ark builders. There's only one way to build an ark. You don't build an ark with this or this necessarily. You build an ark with everything that we've talked about, with the oneness. The ark builds you. And the ark is built through you. Any questions or comments? We don't know when we're going to be able to see Sound of Freedom. It's playing not too far from where we live, but right now we don't drive, so we might be able to get a ride in order to be able to see it, but we'll see how that goes. We're fairly confident that Angel Studios, once the film is no longer in theaters, you will be able to watch it online on their website. And they have this unique thing where they invite individuals who buy tickets to watch their films online. They invite them to purchase a ticket for others. So we went to their website and we noticed they have this series called The Chosen, which are about the lives of the apostles. And it's a I guess a web series, and we don't know if it was on Netflix or Amazon or where it was, but it's on Angel Studios website, and we clicked on it to buy it, and a window popped up that said, "Oh, Tim bought this for you." We don't know who Tim is, but when Tim bought the series, he was invited to pay it forward, and it's right on their website. Buy tickets and pay them forward. It's an opportunity to and so we went there and we can watch The Chosen for free now because somebody, some kind person, paid it forward and we were the beneficiary of that payment. So Angel Studios is, they dislike the label faith-based films, and the filmmakers they shy away from that moniker because it's not a faith-based film. It's a entertaining film. It's an action-packed film. It's a dramatic film. and it's a secular film. It touches the lives of every last man, woman, and child on this planet. So it's a universal film. It's not a faith-based film. But their detractors are going to try to tar and feather them with whatever they can to diminish their accomplishment. So, but again, that's what happens during the fall of a civilization. And there was a YouTube video we watched not long ago. We should have made better note of it, but someone was talking about the fact that child sacrifice becomes prevalent during the fall of every civilization. And again, you see it's no different in ours. And always it's the same thing. It's the high priests and the elite behind the child sacrifice, right? Who's behind all the child trafficking now? Who's keeping it hush hush? Right? Why is the mainstream media not covering this? Right? Why did Disney shelve this movie for 5 years? 5 years this movie sat on the shelf. The filmmakers had to crowdfund money to be able to buy it back, buy the rights back from Disney. What happened was Fox was supposed to distribute the film, but then Disney bought Fox, and the rights landed in the hands of Disney, and so they shelved it. Anyway, does anyone have any questions or comments? Anything at all? If not, here's the link to that YouTube video again, the one with Jordan Peterson interviewing the two gentlemen. And it is really an excellent interview. Oh, Mugaboo says, now I understand why I can't see it in any cinema in Montreal. And he says that he does have a question. Well, do ask your question, Mugaboo. Take your time. The film is playing in several cinemas in and around the Toronto area. I'm surprised it wouldn't be playing in Montreal, but maybe it's, you know what? Maybe no one's done a French translation or subtitle on it. Maybe that's why. Because in Montreal, they have language laws around that, right? Like a film either has to be dubbed in French, or at the bare minimum, it has to have French subtitles, right? His question is, what are your thoughts on sleep paralysis? Sleep paralysis is a condition which can be brought on by a number of different factors, depending on the degree of the paralysis. So it could be full, but it's usually a possession of sorts. Now, it can just be jinn or like astral larvae, but they're not incubi and succubi. They just want to occupy your body and prevent you from. They just want to, like, what's the word? Like entrap you, enslave you, just immobilize you. They just want to immobilize you. They want to feel that rush or that feeling of that you are their prisoner. So it's not a full-blown demonic possession by any means. It's not unlike having a wet dream, where you have fourth dimensional entities that are taking advantage of you, because usually sleep paralysis, again, it happens while you're sleeping. Now, The other facet of it, we've never experienced sleep paralysis, so it's hard for us to describe other things that could be happening. But something is telling us that there's also a situation where you are waking up from your sleep, but your astral body has not fully reintegrated into your physical body yet. So your consciousness is in your body, or you think you're in your body, but you're not really in your body. So therefore, you can't move your body. But then eventually it rectifies itself, it realigns, and then, but again, because we haven't experienced it, it's hard for us to say. We know demonic possession, we know seizures, we know all kinds of other stuff, but sleep paralysis is something that we have not experienced per se. We've been paralyzed by our demon. We felt that. We know what that's like. And we know what it took for us to get out of that. But so regardless, it is a misalignment, or you're being pushed out, or something else is occupying your body that's preventing you from regaining motor control. Yeah, we don't know if that answers what you wanted to hear, what you wanted to know. If you're suffering from sleep paralysis, what we suggest is that, first of all, that you protect your space, and that you work with sage or asophitia. You can burn incense. Also put a pentagram on your door and on your windows, and wash your sheets regularly. Because if it is a jinn, right, if it is astral larvae or astral entities that are causing your sleep paralysis, then you want to protect your space and cleanse your space, smudge your space, use sage or whatever to prevent them from being there. If it's within you, if it's an internal psychological problem, that kind of a possession, that it's some kind of an entity that you carry in your psychology, then it could be something else. Mugaboo says, I used to suffer from sleep paralysis. I prayed and prayed until it went away. Well, that's another solution, obviously, that worked for you. You can always ask for healing and always ask for prayer. Through prayer, always ask for healing and always ask for to be protected. And there you go. But it's whatever it is, it's a mischievous or a negative entity of some kind doing what mischievous and negative entities do, which is be mischievous. Let's see now. Where are we? Hermes Tree says, anything on this topic gets heavily demonized. But the funny thing is, people are open to the topic and do not dismiss it as mad. We're assuming you're referring to the child sacrifice. Is that what you're referring to? That the topic gets demonized? Or anything that, any film talking about the topic gets demonized, but then they turn around, they talk about adding P to the LGBT? Benjamin says, I greatly appreciate the valuable insights you shared about fullness, emptiness, and oneness. The information you provided has been highly informative and educational. Well, we're grateful that you felt it so. Again, we certainly had no ambitions to end up here. It's just, well, there it is. Mugaboo says, oh yes, okay, answer that one. And he said, but I didn't have a mental understanding of what it was. I knew it was related to my lucid dreaming. Okay, so that might have been that, as we said, if you were lucid, okay, so you didn't mention that. If you were lucid dreaming and then you suffered sleep paralysis at the end of a lucid dream, then that's, or end of any dream for that matter, that's you being unable to reintegrate properly into your body. Benjamin says, God bless you. God bless you, Benjamin. Thank you for being here, as always. And thank you for the blessings. Mugabu says, in my experience, it's a demonic attack, or an attack of some entity, as we mentioned. And Hermes Tree says, yes, and mainly how sex trafficking is the biggest global issue. People are shocked when you inform them of the statistics and the size of the dark industry. Yeah, because they're not being told about it. Because here's something that comes up in the interview, and think about it this way. If someone is selling drugs, they can only sell that kilo of cocaine once, right? Now, it can go down like a supply chain and a value chain, so it can go from one dealer to another dealer to another dealer, like right to like from a distributor to wholesaler to small town distributor to street level drug dealers, right? And it's sold, down the line like that. But at the end of the line, those drugs are consumed, they can't be resold. But a child or any other, we can't call them sex workers, we call them what they are, sex slaves. They can be sold over and over and over and over and over again. And in many cases, they can be sold over and over again multiple times a day. That's the difference between drugs or even arms. Like even arms dealers face the reality that they can sell this stuff once and that's it. And it can exchange hands and everything else, but it's just like a value chain thing. But a sex slave is an ongoing, repetitive source of revenue until they're no longer viable as a so-called sex worker, as a sex slave. And if they're still a child, then they will wind up in places like Africa, where human sacrifice is done on a regular basis. Again, the mainstream media won't talk about it because that's racist, right? But there are like, voodoo witch doctors and all kinds of stuff happening in Africa, and people believe that they're performing black magic is what they're doing, and so they need the blood of innocents. They need young blood. They need this kind of blood, that kind of blood, virgin blood, and they do child sacrifices. It's part of their black magic rituals. There's nothing else to be said about it. It's not racist. It's factual. It's the truth. It's the hard, harsh truth that far too many people don't want to hear because people hate the truth. And no man is more despised than he who speaks the truth. And Plato said that 500 years before Christ. Hermes Tree says porn and the organ industry. Yeah, let's not forget about the organ harvesting industry. The organ industry are all linked to this sex network, which is then linked to the sacrifice covens all the way to the top. Yeah, exactly. It's all connected, and it is what it is, right? It is what it is. And it's Neo-Babylon. That's what it is. It's Neo-Babylon. And it's going to fall. It will fall. The question is, how will it fall? That's the only question. And when? Sorry. How will it fall and when? These are the only questions. But it will fall. There has never been any civilization in the history of any humanity, but particularly this humanity, which has not been destroyed. and there's never been any humanity which has not been destroyed. So it's an inevitability. This is another reason why we're writing this book. And yes, just to before anybody asks the question, in case you're wondering, our target is to put it out, have it published and available sometime in the fall, like in the early fall. If we can manage it, September. If not, October. And a lot of it will have to do with the publisher that we're working with. And but it's our intention to have our part completed, our work completed by the end of the summer. So we want to submit it to the publisher early September. If we can get it out by the end of September, then we will. If not, then it might roll over into October. But that's the plan, and it looks like we may be on track to be able to do that. Sometimes it's slow going, but we're fairly confident that we can do what must be done to make that work. We have started taking steps to see about making a website, and if we can, we are making inquiries or to see if we can arrange it so that we can start taking pre-orders. So we might do something akin to a something like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, where we can take pre-orders, and that your reward for a certain donation is a copy of the book. So basically, we use Indiegogo or Kickstarter as a way to market and pre-sell copies of the book. But we don't have anybody doing that for us at the moment, so we don't want to spend too much time on that aspect, because then it's like making a Kickstarter video and everything else like that eats into a lot of time, which we could be spending on writing the book. So but anyway, all of that will shake out. Hermes Tree says, I think it would be great for you and Peterson to talk. You could also be helpful with Joe Rogan. So certainly it would be nice to get on their shows. But really, the only way that that's going to happen is if we can get copies of our book in their hands. And so that's our intention, is when the book is available, we send copies, be it physically or digitally, to them. And we have a list of other potential websites and so YouTube channels and so on that who may be interested in reading the book and may be interested in getting us on there. Jordan Peterson might be, well, who knows? Well, we don't want to jinx anything. So, but certainly that's, well, again, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Benjamin says, the Black Lodge has taken all that is good and innocent and turned them into something dark and evil. That is why they are making child sacrifices, because a child is the embodiment of goodness and innocence, and they wanted to destroy that to terrorize us. Mugaboo says, it's funny, we Africans see Europeans as very evil, and Europeans view Africans as very evil as well. Well, if it's any consolation, there is no shortage of evil in the world, and some of the most horrendous evils ever and atrocities ever committed against this humanity were done by Europeans. So Mugaboo says, I think Jesus said it best. First, remove the beam out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. Yes. Yeah. Take the log out of your eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye. Yeah. That's true enough. That's true enough. But again, there's no shortage of evil in the world, and nobody has a monopoly on evil, and nobody is immune from evil, because mechanicity, this humanity is 97% mechanical and only 3% conscious. And well, there it is, right? There it is. But the antidote to that is oneness. Because when you achieve oneness with yourself, then oneness with your fellow man is a given. It's just a given. And that's not to say that you have to go around, hugging, murderers and psychopaths. But at the very least, you develop a kind of compassionate indifference, and you recognize there before the grace of God go I, and you recognize that we're in the Kali Yuga, and that the Black Lodge, their job is to twist, tempt, and corrupt all that is good, pure, and of the light. And there is nothing more endearing to the Black Lodge than corrupting what we see as purity and innocence. Because to the Black Lodge, from their perspective, that's chaos. That's impurity. To them, control is purity. But this is a topic we'll have to get into. I wouldn't want to open up a whole new topic because we're at 3.5 hours almost. So we'll have to get into the different perspectives. So how the Black Lodge views the world. You have to understand that from the Black Lodge's point of view, the White Lodge are demons. Angels are demons from the Black Lodge's perspective. So at some level, all these pawns, all these useful idiots of the Black Lodge, they actually believe that what they're doing is right. They really do. They're not like mustache twirling villains that know that they're evil and that they're blah, and they're serving evil or whatever. They're not like that. They believe that their doctrine, their philosophy, their approach is the correct one. And that people, love and light and Christians and all that kind of stuff, we're all just naive and foolish and chaotic. And who the hell needs all this free will stuff? This free will stuff. This is free will. This is for the birds. This is like it's the cause of all the problems in the world. If only we can get the right control over everybody, then we can make all our problems go away. That's the way the Black Lodge sees it. Men need to be governed. Right? You have to the Black Lodge, it's all about control. It's all about possession, identification, attachment, control. All of these words are the cause of all the suffering that we recognize as enslavement and keeping us trapped in mechanical nature. But remember, the Black Lodge is mechanical nature. They work for mechanical nature. Their faith, if you want to call it that, their spirituality, if you want to call it that, is based in mechanical nature, in mechanical laws. And so when you think, and so for them, the purity of mechanical nature is its predictability, is its mechanicity. Why do you think that these elites obsess over timepieces, Rolex, Patek Philippe, jeweled movements and all this kind of stuff, and why they obsess over handcrafted timepieces and that cost like tens of thousands of dollars and whatnot. Why? Because of the precision. It's precision gears, precision timepieces, because they're obsessed with time. Time is money, remember? We know that time doesn't exist. All there is a present moment. There is no future, there is no past, there is only the eternal now. But for the Black Lodge, time is of the essence. Time is real. And everything is about the past and the future and ancestors and all of the rest of it. And so precision, timekeeping instruments, that's their religion. The precise interaction of mechanical forces to keep control, to keep time. Anyway, we can get into this in more depth at a later date. Who knows? Maybe next week if you guys are interested. My point of view, the Jedi are evil. If you are not with me, then you're my enemy. And Obi-Wan says, well, then you are truly lost. And I'll do what I must. Yeah. Yep. But again, that's coming from the good and evil perspective. We actually, our insights into the actual nature of evil as mechanicity, and we can actually give you insight into the mechanics of the Black Lodge, into the mechanics of evil, because that's what it is. We can do this because evil is mechanical, so we can look under the hood of evil and discover the mechanics, just like opening up the back of a Rolex and looking at the precision gears. Benjamin says, thought and time are the two factors of fear. That's a quote from Jidda Krishnamurti. Or can't remember his first name. Anyway. Yeah, thought and time. Because when you combine thinking about the past and thinking about the future, and yeah, because fear, what they call trauma, right? So past fear, past traumas is worrying about the past and projecting it into the future. And wanting to control outcomes, which we've talked about many times. And you control outcomes based on precedent. So you have conditioned beliefs about the future based on the past, and so on and so forth. So he's right about that. Well, we're just shy of the 3.5 hour mark. We will give anyone another 30 seconds to type a question or make a comment, or if you want to type a longer question, make a short comment first saying, I have a longer question to ask. Because if not, then we want to thank everyone for watching today, and we hope to see you again next week. We hope you get a chance to see Sound of Freedom. If we do, we'll definitely let you know that we've seen it. And if no one has anything else to ask or to mention, then as always, we wish all of you a wonderful week. You're welcome, Hermes Trees. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your input, your interactivity, your questions. Mugaboo says, thank you, Atlas. Always a great sermon. Thank you. Thank you, Mugaboo. We try not to sermonize, but hey, it is what it is. Listen, everyone, have a wonderful week. Thank you for being here. And as always, where's my hand there? Inferential peace. Take care, everyone.